afternoon. On behalf of the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate, I am delighted to welcome all of you to this very special program. I want to thank our partners on this event, the Consulate General of Ireland in Boston, the Embassy of Ireland, USA. We are so appreciative of the support we receive through the Irish government immigrant support program that allows us to host wonderful conversations like this one today on the book edited by Brian Murphy and Donnacha Beacháin, From Whence I Came, The Kennedy Legacy, Ireland and America. It is a very special honor for all of us to have Taoiseach Micheál Martin with us here today, especially during the busy week of St. Patrick's Day festivities. I want to thank the Taoiseach for his leadership in continuing to foster Irish-American relationships. This was Ted Kennedy's favorite time of year. For him, St. Patrick's Day wasn't just a day. It wasn't just a week. It was really an entire season and a time to celebrate the ties that bind the country of his birth and the country from whence his ancestors came. He told me so often that his brother, President Kennedy, was never happier than on his trip to Ireland in the spring of 1963. I would say the same of Teddy on our many trips to Ireland. He was always so happy to be there. As we approach the 40th anniversary of the founding of the Friends of Ireland in Congress by Ted Kennedy, Pat Moynihan, Hugh Carey, Tip O'Neill, the Four Horsemen, I can think of no better time to have a conversation about the Kennedy legacy and Ireland than now. I'm delighted that we're joined today by Congressman Richie Neal, the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, a true friend of Ted Kennedy's and of this institute, and a true friend of Ireland. We're also joined by our former Congressman Joe Kennedy, public servant extraordinaire, a man who has never stopped asking what he can do for his country, and a man who has the map of Ireland written on his face and in his hair. We're joined by Ambassador Samantha Power, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, an academic who served our nation so brilliantly at the United Nations as our ambassador. And we're so delighted to be joined by Dr. Alison Marr, Deputy Consul General of Ireland in Shanghai, who is the author of one of the chapters in the book that we will be discussing today. Thank you all so much for being here. And I must give a special shout out to Kennedy Institute board member Cody Keenan, who is a former Kennedy staff alum as well, and who contributed a chapter in the book as well called The Download, Writing Speeches with Barack Obama. I'm now delighted to turn the program over to Dr. Leisha Moore, Consul General of Ireland to New England. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and I now turn this over to Dr. Moore. Thank you.
Díomh recorda agus Banachly a Philip Horrid Arif. Friends, this is a very unusual St. Patrick's Day after a challenging year both sides of the Atlantic, but I'm so delighted that we are holding this very special event together with our friends in the Kennedy Institute, and I thank Victoria Reggie Kennedy for her very kind words. It's great to have such an event at this time of year when we celebrate the very deep bonds between Ireland and America, and especially Ireland and Massachusetts. And as Mrs. Reggie Kennedy said, this March also marks the 40th anniversary of the founding of the Friends of Ireland in Congress by Senator Kennedy and others. And since that time, this group has contributed very significantly in many ways towards peace and reconciliation on the island of Ireland, and it continues to do very important work today as well here. Of course, we're also celebrating the launch of an important new book, From Whence I Came, which offers fresh reflections on the Kennedy family and its political legacy in Ireland and in America. And I'm really delighted that we are joined by Taoiseach Micheál Martin, and a very distinguished panel who will offer their reflections on the book and on the Irish-American relationship. But first, I am very happy to welcome the editors of From Whence I Came, Dr. Brian Murphy of Technological University Dublin, who's director of the Kennedy Summer School in New Ross, and Professor Donnacha of Beacháin of Dublin City University. You're very welcome.
Thanks, Leisha. Donnacha and I just want to say a few thank yous, and we've divided them between us. So firstly, I want to thank my parents, Eddie and Catherine Murphy, my brother John, who lives in Boston, Kathy, Madeline, Luke, and Owen. I also want to mention my godson, Caleb, who's 6, nearly 7, Evan, Alexa, and Liam. This book has its origins in the Kennedy Summer School, New Ross, which is an annual festival of political, historical, and cultural discussion. The work done by the Kennedy Summer School, the JFK Trust, and Wexford County Council have made New Ross Ireland's capital of Irish-American heritage and a must-visit location for US tourists. There are too many people in New Ross for me to thank in the time allocated, but I do want to mention Willie Keelty, the extraordinarily hardworking chairman of the Kennedy Summer School, and its founder, the late, great Noel Whelan. Noel was a close friend of mine. I wish he could be with us this afternoon, but this book is dedicated to Noel Whelan's memory. All royalties from the book are being donated to the New Ross Community Hospital, and I want to thank Frances Ryan and her directors and the staff for their great charitable work. On behalf of Donnacha and myself, I want to thank the Taoiseach and all the guest speakers at today's launch. I have had the privilege of knowing the Taoiseach for well over 20 years, and I know that his perseverance, his work ethic, and his political skills will be central to Ireland emerging strongly from this pandemic. I want to acknowledge all my friends and work colleagues at Technological University Dublin. I especially want to mention Mr. David Carson, the chair of the governing body of TU Dublin, my own head of school, Dr. Dominic Delan, and the chair of my university's trade union branch, Jerry Farley. We have fantastic universities in Ireland, and our doors are always open to American students as a study abroad option. The period around St. Patrick's Day has always been a significant time in the annals of the Kennedy family. On the 20th of March, 1849, Patrick Kennedy boarded a ship called the Washington Irving and set sail for Boston. On the 16th of March, 1938, Joseph P. Kennedy, the grandson of Irish famine emigrants, presented his credentials as US ambassador to the King and Queen of England at Buckingham Palace. And on the 16th of March, 1968, Robert Francis Kennedy in the Senate caucus room launched his campaign for the presidency of the United States. In our own time, America, and indeed the wider world, has experienced and endured 4 years of painful division. We would all do well to remember the healing and inspirational words of Bobby Kennedy. And I want to leave you by recalling some of Bobby Kennedy's famous words from that last campaign of his in 1968. What we need is not division. What we need is not hatred. What we need is not violence, but is love and wisdom and compassion towards one another. Thank you all very much. And I'll hand you over to my good friend, Donnacha back on, my co-editor.
Thanks, Brian. Brian and I go back 30 years to our college days, and it's been an absolute pleasure to work with him on this book. I'd like first and foremost to thank my wife, Carolina, and our daughter, Gaia, to whom all my endeavors are dedicated. A special word of gratitude to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate, the Consulate General of Ireland in Boston, and the Embassy of Ireland in the USA for organizing this very special event. I greatly appreciate the support of my colleagues and friends at Dublin City University, in particular our President Dara Keogh, his predecessor Breen McCrath, who now leads efforts to combat COVID-19 in Ireland, and our longtime Dean John Doyle. People like these at Dublin City University have created the atmosphere and conditions necessary to produce the book that brings us together tonight. Indeed, the role of the university in public life has never been important. We live today with the challenge of COVID-19, but there are other, arguably more dangerous viruses for which we must be ever vigilant and ready to fight. Throughout the world, the threats of dictatorship and demagoguery are manifest. Universities can and do play a vital role in building up our defenses against the viruses of authoritarianism and as bulwarks against intolerance, oppression, and democratic backsliding. Brian and I are very proud of this groundbreaking work, which contains specially commissioned pieces from a remarkably diverse range of respected figures. Many thanks to Marion Press for producing such a wonderfully lavish illustrated manuscript. A book is, of course, only as good as its authors, and these are stellar indeed. Apart from the contributions from Brian and myself, the chapters are from Celestine Murphy, Michael Kennedy, Howard Keeley, Harvey O'Brien, Felix Larkin, Mary Daly, Bob Schmuel, Larry Donnelly, Alison Marr, who of course joins us tonight from Shanghai, Bob Shroom, Cody Keenan, Tad Devine, and Kerry Kennedy. With the presidency of Joe Biden seeing a renewed focus on broader themes within Irish, American, and global politics, this book is, we believe, a timely collection that offers new perspectives on the politics of Ireland and the United States. And finally, please buy this book. It was released to online bookshops today, and all royalties, as Brian said, go to a very worthy cause. And on that note, I'll hand back the virtual microphone to Leisha.
So thank you very much, Brian and Donnacha. I'm now going to hand over to our moderator for the rest of the programme, Dr. Bob Morrow, who is Executive Director of the Irish Institute and the Global Leadership Institute at Boston College. And Bob will be, first of all, in conversation with Taoiseach Micheál Martin. So over to you, Bob. Thank you.
Thank you, Leisha. I really appreciate it. And thank you to the Kennedy Institute for hosting today's event. We're going to start this evening's discussion with the Taoiseach. Thank you, Taoiseach, for joining us. It's a real pleasure to speak with you. As you know, in 1963, President Kennedy visited Ireland and he spoke in the Oireachtas, and he said during that speech, if this nation had achieved its present political and economic stature a century or so ago, my great-grandfather might not have left New Ross, and I might, if fortunate, be sitting down there with you. It's a very kind of wry and amusing comment. But as you know, the text that we're talking about tonight, from Whence I Came, dives right into the heart of this. So I'm interested, Taoiseach, to hear from you what the role of the Kennedys has been in the development of the Ireland-US relationship.
Well, first of all, Bob, I just want to thank you and to say, first of all, how honoured I am to be able to join you for the launch of this new book, which details the enduring legacy of the Kennedy family and their pivotal role in maintaining and advancing Irish-American relations, and also to say how heartwarming the remarks of Victoria were there in terms of bringing home to us the very personal affection and attachment to Ireland that Ted and the entire Kennedy family consistently displayed. I'm also delighted to see you, Bob, again, albeit virtually. I think we last met in September 2019 when I spoke at the Kennedy Summer School in New Ross. And of course, it's impossible to mention the Kennedy Summer School without, as Brian has said, without thinking of its talented founder, Noel Whelan, who left us too soon in July of 2019. Just as President Kennedy's legacy lives on in the ever-strengthening Irish-American relationship, Noel's legacy is the thriving cultural institution that is the Kennedy Summer School. As you know, the idea of linking the school to remembering John F. Kennedy's visit in 1963 was Noel's, and the Kennedy visit marked a very important moment in modern Irish history and indeed in American history. President Kennedy, whose life was tragically cut short, ushered in a new era in American public life, an era of hope and expectation. And he had a profound impact on Ireland too, which took deep satisfaction from the election as president of someone who cherished his links with his ancestral homeland. The president's visit to Ireland, the first visit of a serving US president, boosted morale at a time of change in Ireland and great change across the world. The title of this book comes from a speech President Kennedy gave in New Ross during his visit to Ireland. To rapturous crowds, the president expressed his pleasure at being back from whence I came. The Kennedy family never forgot where they came from. And that deep connection of the Kennedy family to Ireland was again expressed in 1981, 133 years after Patrick Kennedy fled a famine-stricken Ireland in search of a better future in America.
when Senator Ted Kennedy founded the Friends of Ireland caucus. He did so along with fellow Massachusetts native Speaker Tip O'Neill, Senator Patrick Moynihan and Hugh Carey, in recognition of the unique relationship between the United States and Ireland. And over the years, the Friends of Ireland have provided invaluable support for the cause of peace on our island. Throughout his decades-long tenure in the Senate, Senator Kennedy was instrumental in instigating the US government's active involvement in the Irish peace process, working closely with peacemakers like the late John Hume and engaging fellow members of Congress on Irish issues. The work of the Friends also remains vitally important to this day. Members of the Friends, such as Chairman Richie Neal and Congressman Joe Kennedy III, have been an important voice in seeking to protect the hard-won gains of the Good Friday Agreement from potential disruptions caused by Britain's departure from the European Union. As we launch this book, which reflects on the Kennedy family legacy, we do so on the 40th anniversary of the founding of the Friends of Ireland, and at an event hosted by an institute that Senator Kennedy founded. I want to pay tribute to the Senator's enormous contribution to Ireland and the lasting legacy he and his family have bequeathed us.
Well, that's excellent, Taoiseach, and thank you for doing that. I myself am lucky enough to be involved with Kennedy Summer School, and Noel Whelan was a friend, and he departed too soon. I think everyone who knew him was very much amazed by the work that he did. In teasing out the relationship that Noel did between New Ross and the United States and the Kennedy family, I mean, what are some of the key things? You've already talked a little bit about the peace process and protecting the peace in Northern Ireland. But in addition to that, what else does the Kennedy legacy mean specifically for the people of Ireland? You talked a little bit about hope and a changing world.
Well, maybe I give it just maybe a personal anecdote. The Kennedys touch the heart of the Irish people, and I was only 3 years of age. President John F. Kennedy came to Ireland, and when I grew up in my home in Cork, because he visited Cork City as well, and I hope the people from the Ross don't mind me mentioning my own native city. But what was extraordinary was everybody had memories of his visit to the city and his visit to Ireland. He just really connected, and it was quite extraordinary. And when I became Lord Mayor of the city of Cork in 1992, 93, it coincided with the appointment of Jean Kennedy Smith as the US ambassador to Ireland. And she came to pay me a visit. And people lined the streets just outside the mayoral office because they wanted to touch a Kennedy. They wanted to see a Kennedy. There was a bit of magic about that Kennedy connection. And that's a personal thing. And obviously he was the first Irish-American president. And then subsequently, a very good book as well by Maurice Fitzpatrick on Hume in America. And you get how Ted Kennedy reached out to John Hume, and how a relationship developed and built then that became a catalyst for the Friends of Ireland, but also a changing approach to the issue of Northern Ireland and the Irish-American connection to Northern Ireland, influence in Northern Ireland. And so evolved and matured a relationship, I think, that had a defining impact on the peace process. And it really is an incredible story in some respects, but a vital story as well, because I think it moved, I think Alison Maher covers it in a chapter in this book, Ted Kennedy led, if you like, the diaspora of peacemakers, not of spoilers. And that was so vital to the journey that the peace process took, moving people away from old sort of irredentist sort of military approach or militant approach to one of diplomacy, democracy, persuasion, reaching out, engaging. That is an incredible legacy. And the Kennedy family, and clearly through Ted Kennedy's work, really can take great credit for that, because that to me is the lasting legacy that continues to the present day in terms of the relationship between Irish America and Ireland. And that over time embraced all traditions on the island of Ireland, all traditions. And that's important as well to underline.
Thank you, Taoiseach. We will later in this episode or this webcast be speaking with Dr. Marr and talking with the panel about the Friends of Ireland and its history and its legacy. I mean, you've already talked a little bit about that legacy, but you and your colleagues in government continue to engage with the Friends of Ireland today. It continues to be important. I mean, what is the next iteration? If Senator Kennedy moved to that distant peacemaker, as Dr. Marr calls him, through the Friends of Ireland and with the Friends of Ireland, what is the next iteration, do you think, of the Friends of Ireland for the Irish-US relationship?
Well, I think in terms of the current situation, there's a lot of ongoing work required in the context of Brexit, and also in terms of following through on the potential of the Good Friday Agreement. In some respects, there's a whole generation who have grown up on the island of Ireland, and particularly in Northern Ireland, who've been spared the daily conflict, the daily murder and mayhem. But we need to go further now in terms of, I've developed a shared island dialogue on the island of Ireland, where I want sort of true reconciliation and engaging with people from different traditions, irrespective of one's constitutional preferences, a reigniting of the North-South partnership. And I'd like to see the Friends assisting and supporting that concept, that idea of cross-border projects. I have a ring-fenced funding initiative for that, but also the whole idea of a dialogue. And we started a dialogue, North-South. We've had a young people's dialogue, for example. What do the young people of the island feel about the future and how we share this island together? People of different traditions, different constitutional preferences. We had an environmental all-island dialogue in terms of climate change. And so that's an important initiative. And we'd love to see the Friends contribute constructively to that and be part of maybe a dialogue under the auspices of the Shared Island dialogue series in the short term. Also in the context of Brexit, then I think we need to revitalize the European Union-US relationship. And again, the Friends can be helpful there also in terms of Ireland's role as a bridge between Europe and the US, and particularly in the context of what Donnacha said earlier about our collective need to unite against authoritarianism and to reaffirm the values of democracy, free speech that we all share. And that's with EU, United States, and the United Kingdom. It's extremely important that all three stay aligned on the fundamentals that underpin parliamentary democracies. The rule of law, separation of powers, and very basic tenets of how our societies are constructed. And I think the Friends can play a constructive role there. And in addition, as I said, the evolution of the debate about how we share this island together.
Taoiseach, in September 2019, in New Ross, you gave a speech reflecting on Kennedy's visit and the relationship that the then Taoiseach, Sean Lemass, had to it. And you were drawing on that. And you referenced Sean Lemass's interest in reaching out to different communities across Northern Ireland, in embracing technologies and skills development and education, and in also being an active leader in Europe. So I'm kind of interested, building on what you just said about the Brexit period. What is Ireland's role going to be now in Europe? How is Ireland going to help lead in a post-Brexit Europe and in that transatlantic relationship with the United States?
Well, I suppose if I could just say, like John F. Kennedy and Sean Lemass personified the opening up of that era, the sense of opening up the world, people looking outwards as opposed to inwards. And Lemass was the great architect of modern Ireland in terms of moving from an insular, protectionist type approach to an open multilateralist in terms of trade, in particular. I think it's interesting, and so into the future, I think the big debate in the next decade will be, at one level, how far back do people roll back globalization, or do we create a new paradigm in terms of how we maintain open trade, open borders, how we nurture multilateralism, internationally based organizations, rules-based organizations, how we give them greater strength and underpin them. And that's Ireland's role. And within the pandemic is having an impact, and even within Europe, because of all that happened at the beginning with the search and the mad scramble for PPE and all of that at the beginning of the pandemic, this idea of strategic autonomy is emerging within European quarters. I have certain views about that. I understand some of it in terms of self-reliance, in terms of basic essentials of dealing with a pandemic. On the other hand, it can very quickly lead to protectionist impulses, which I would resist. And I think Ireland, being a small, open economy, thrives on in a global environment that is more open. And so we support free trade. That would be my perspective on that. And I think that's the role that Ireland can play most effectively, both within the European Union to make sure that it maintains its esprit de corps in terms of the single market, the philosophy behind that, how it has actually worked for us and worked for Europe, and strengthening and developing the relationship between the US and Europe, and doing it on a gradual basis and on a realistic basis. We all have to watch the internal politics of our respective domains. But within those constraints, I think we should edge forward on a gradual basis and reaffirm the importance of bringing down barriers, tearing down barriers, as opposed to erecting new ones.
And of course, your backdrop there is all about a multinational bringing down of barriers. And you brought this up already. As part of that effort, you launched in October the Shared Island Initiative. And in that launch, you said that the Good Friday Agreement provides for the institutions that we need to help move us to a post-Brexit period. All that's happened since last October. Do you still feel that way? And are you still optimistic about there being the necessary institutions to transition to successfully to a post-Brexit period?
Well, I'm always a half glass full merchant as opposed to the opposite. So I tend to be in the optimistic frame of mind. Obviously, Brexit has created challenges, and currently we are going through a difficult period. The operation of the protocol has created issues, particularly within the North and amongst unionists and loyalists, and that has to be acknowledged. I do not dismiss issues that have been raised, but I do believe that the withdrawal agreement between the European Union and the United Kingdom has the mechanisms, the Joint Committee and the Specialised Committees. It's within those mechanisms that these issues should be resolved. Unilateralism will not work, it erodes trust. And in our view, the mechanisms are there to try and resolve these issues. Remember, Brexit has only taken effect over a very short period, 2.5 months. There's a very strong sense that on the UK side, they're not ready. They clearly haven't the infrastructure in place. Their companies aren't ready in terms of the change. Even with a Brexit agreement that has avoided tariffs and avoided quotas and has underpinned the Good Friday Agreement, nonetheless a huge change. And people may not realize that in the US or elsewhere. The number of customs clearances have just gone through, exponentially grown because of the Brexit agreement. And so there's a lot more bureaucracy, a lot more form filling and moving goods from Britain into Ireland and eventually vice versa and into Europe. And it will be interesting to see how that develops, and I think it will ultimately have an impact on our respective economies. The absence of tariffs and quotas has been a great win for us relative to what could have happened. So in terms of the North, I think we need more people-to-people engagement again, and the institutions are there. They can be used more fully than they have been, I think, in the past. I'd like to see more work on educational disadvantage. It's an issue of concern to me for quite a long time that certain communities within Northern Ireland, certain communities, their young people are not completing school to the same degree as elsewhere. And that's a problem. And we should invest collectively, the British government, the Irish government, and the Northern Ireland executive in making sure that every young person gets an opportunity to progress in education. And that has wider impact on how society develops into the future and how the island develops into the future. And that needs more focus, for example.
Thank you, Taoiseach. I just have one quick question as we transition to the panel. Later this week, you'll be meeting with President Biden. Will you be extending an invitation to him to meet you in Ireland at some point?
Well, I already have. And his response to me when I spoke to him after his election was, try and keep me out.
Very good.
Look forward to that. And obviously, you know, we're all kind of constrained, obviously, by COVID-19, but we appreciate his genuine warmth and affection for Ireland. People are just don't underestimate how thrilled people are across Europe and certainly in Ireland at his very quick decisions in terms of rejoining the Paris Accord and climate change, rejoining the World Health Organization, UNFPA. It's just great to see that. And we take great heart from that. And I just have to say that.
Well, thank you very much, Taoiseach. I hope to see you at some point on either side of the Atlantic.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your time. We're now going to be turning to the panel discussion. In this discussion, we'll be joined by the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee and the Congressman from Massachusetts 1st District, the Honorable Richie Neal, Ambassador Samantha Power, the former United States Ambassador to the United Nations and now Professor of Practice at the Harvard Kennedy School and Law School, the Honorable Joe Kennedy III, the former Congressman for the Massachusetts 4th District, and Dr. Alison Marr, Deputy Consul General of Ireland in Shanghai and author of Ted Kennedy, Distant Peacemaker in From Whence I Came. I'm going to turn first to Chairman Neal. Chairman, we've already been talking a little bit about this, but this is the 40th anniversary of the Friends of Ireland Caucus. It was founded in 17 March 1981. The caucus has been active in its analysis of Brexit and its relationship to the Good Friday Agreement and the peace in Northern Ireland. What is the caucus doing now to further protect the Good Friday Agreement? And who are your partners in your work?
Well, first, a word of thanks to the Kennedy Institute. One of my great friends in professional and political life, personal life, was Ted Kennedy. I thought that the measurement that he brought to legislative achievement is what we all should honor. I understand the role of creating a narrative, but Teddy's great gift was actually changing lives through legislation. And I'm thrilled to be with Joe Kennedy, a great pal of mine. And thank the Taoiseach for giving us this kind of time. Micheál Martin's been a longtime friend. I have enjoyed his hospitality in Cork, one of my more memorable evenings, and very grateful as well. The Friends of Ireland was founded to offset the gun running that was taking place in the United States through many of my own constituents. Springfield has a large Irish American population. Boston, Worcester, Pittsfield, same thing. And across big cities in America, it was well known where the late night collection was going. And there was an effort made to try to find a more diplomatic approach. And the founding of the Friends of Ireland clearly not only scoped out that issue, but I know Ambassador Power is on the line as well with us. There was another very significant challenge that we had, and that was getting a more balanced approach from our State Department as it related to the North of Ireland. It was very hard to push past the argument that the UK offered that the North of Ireland was a matter that was internal to the United Kingdom. And as part of what was described as the Good Friday Agreement, which I participated in fully, started when Bobby Sands and the hunger strikers died, it was the following. The Republic of Ireland conceded Articles 2 and 3 of its constitutional status as it related to the North, which laid claim to the North. Secondly, the idea was to remove the border that divided the island. Partition is 100 years old this very year. And the idea was that all the parties would have to give up something to bring about a new day. And it has worked beyond what anybody might have imagined. 30 years ago, or just before the Good Friday Agreement, there were 30,000 British soldiers in an area the size of the state of Connecticut across the north. Watchtowers, military policing that kept one tradition controlled by the other tradition. And the Good Friday Agreement dramatically changed all of that. But what was really important about the Good Friday Agreement was the Belfast-Dublin connection, Article 2 of the agreement. That has worked just as we all had envisioned. So the Friends of Ireland, they keep a careful balance within Congress, as noted by that visit that Speaker Pelosi and I had to the former border 2 years ago, in which we noted to the UK any hope of a bilateral trade agreement between the United States and the UK, which I think we all believe is desirable, could not do anything to jeopardize the Good Friday Agreement or reestablish any sort of a border on the island. And I think there have been a series of changes that have been arbitrarily embraced by the UK, which seem to, as the Taoiseach has noted, have become based on the problems created by Brexit. So we continue to monitor that activity. Taoiseach will join us with the president on Wednesday at the Speaker's luncheon. And I must tell you that the fortitude with which we've approached this is going to remain. Tony Blair invited the Friends of Ireland to the British Embassy in Washington, just as he was leaving. And he surprised all of us because we had not exactly seen the world the way he did. But he had an interesting comment that night. He said that the UK and the United States generally agreed on most principles. But he said there was one place where they didn't agree, and that was on the north of Ireland. And he then went on to thank the Friends of Ireland for being honest brokers and the encouragement that we had offered along the way. Yes, supporting the nationalist position, but never ignoring the idea that you could not bomb the Unionists into a united Ireland. So John Hume was a great pal of mine, stayed at his home, and just honored him at the request that I was offered to say some kind words about him. But this has been a long journey for all of us, but it worked. There could be no threat to the Good Friday Agreement. It included the American dimension, and the last word is this: the United States is a guarantor of the Good Friday Agreement. We intend to see it through.
Chairman, you talked about the role the Friends of Ireland played as an honest broker, and we're going to hear more from Dr. Marr about that. What are the Friends doing now to help bring the unionist community into the conversation? This has obviously been something that's been popping up. The Loyalist Communities Council came out and criticized the protocol. So what role will the Friends play to help, ensure that there are good solutions that everyone can embrace and in a cross-community kind of way?
The genius of the Good Friday Agreement is the following: if you want to be Irish, be Irish. If you want to be British, be British. I debated Sammy Wilson of the DUP just a few nights ago on the BBC over this very issue. And I think that the Friends of Ireland has said simply, stay with the implementation of the Good Friday Agreement. There are a number of constitutional questions that will be answered over time, but we offered no threat to unionism as much as we offered the reassurance that any future endeavor or change in the constitutional status of the North would certainly include their participation.
Thank you, Chairman. Ambassador Power, you're not in Congress, you're not a member of the Friends of Ireland, but you are Irish and you're American. And we've been talking about President Kennedy's visit to Ireland and his famous speech in New Ross, from Whence I Came. And in it, President Kennedy noted that some of what is good about Ireland can be seen in the United States, and some of what is good about the United States can be seen in Ireland. So, for you as a diplomatic leader, what have you taken from Ireland into your role, your diplomatic leadership role here in the United States?
Thank you so much. And just let me, like everybody, just underscore how honored I am to be here with such esteemed guests and panelists. Very excited for Wednesday. I've just moved to Washington, D.C. As I wait for what I hope will be Senate confirmation to run USAID. And my husband, Cass Sunstein, has just started at the Department of Homeland Security. But I'm going to be looking at the White House, and I can imagine the revelry and the warmth that bilateral meeting is going to entail. And I do want to just say one quick thing. I'll come right to your question, but I think what Congressman Neal did with Speaker Pelosi, with Congressman Kennedy, really made a difference. I think it just to say that the Good Friday Agreement is paramount. Y'all are going to work out your Brexit thing. You'll figure out how you work it out, but nothing is going to interfere with the terms of this agreement or with this hard-won peace. And I think it's really helpful to sort of go back in time and just take note of that, because sometimes in Washington, there are many things that are done symbolically or rhetorically, and it's important to take note of those that actually become a source of leverage. And I really think that it's just another example of this partnership paying dividends for the people of Ireland. You asked sort of what of Ireland did I take with me? I came when I was a kid, when I was 9, to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1979. I came with my Dublin accent, but I quickly worked to embrace a Pittsburgh accent so I could fit in. But I think that one of the things that stayed with me is the importance of meeting people where they are, and where the Irish live this, I think, in the most flamboyant way is as storytellers. I once heard Colm Tóibín say that when he was growing up, I think he grew up in Wexford, that the worst thing you could be in his house, if you were coming to visit his house or his mammy, you could be ugly, you could be smelly, but God forbid you be boring. You just cannot be boring. If somebody came to the house and was, oh God, she's so boring, and all the kids would scramble upstairs to hide and to tell a story. And you may think, what does this have to do with geopolitics and diplomacy? Well, unfortunately, people don't tell stories in geopolitics often, and don't try to meet people where they are. And they don't try to put themselves in the shoes of the others and think about the audience. They just kind of, roll out the talking points that are so timeless as sometimes to be useless. But to tell a story and to really try to bring your audience, your interlocutors, to a place that they may not want to go is incredibly important. And that's with vivid detail, it's with character. So when I was UN ambassador, one of the things I did was I tried to get out of the way. I hope I'm a decent storyteller. On a good day, I had to be to get a word in at an Irish dinner table. But often you bring people from conflict affected areas, for example, to the Security Council. We had, at the height of the Ebola crisis, when the world was not responding, when the response looked a lot like the sort of each man for himself international response to COVID that we're experiencing, starting to redress, I hope. But instead of me telling the story of what Ebola was doing to the people of West Africa, to have a health worker from there have his voice up on a screen in the Security Council. So I think the power of storytelling, the importance of meeting people where they are. And then I think what is really truly Irish, I know it sounds, kind of sort of a little bit essentializing, I suppose, but I do think the essence of dignity. I mean, what is the sin of an occupation, right? Or being told what to do, of being bossed around, of not being able to pray the way you want or speak the way you want. It is a violation of dignity. And really thinking about the centrality of human dignity, the acute need that people have for agency, to vote, to speak, to pray for themselves, and to make those judgments. I think that's in every Irish folk song. It's in many Republican poems, but it's really what makes the world go round. It's in Black Lives Matter. It's in the Me Too movement. It's one reason, that our country is very divided, is people feel like they're being looked past and not seen fully. So I think that appreciation is something I bring with me. And then I was lucky as I got to represent the most powerful country in the world. But I think when you're representing the most powerful country in the world, it's really important to at least be able to try to imagine what it would be like to represent a not so powerful country, maybe a small country with a huge amount to offer, as Ireland now has. And the Taoiseach mentioned Ireland's leadership now globally. I mean, we'll come to that, but seeing Ireland step up on the UN Security Council, on one level, the US and Ireland are together on the UN Security Council, but as America, you can't forget that to be an island nation subjected to climate change, to be a country that so recently has had its economic miracle. There are things that Ireland has to offer, and it's incumbent, I think, on the United States to see that, to celebrate that, to partner with that, but also to give Ireland its independence to exercise its voice.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think I do want to return to this concept of meeting the world where it is, and but before I do that, I'd like to ask Congressman Kennedy essentially the same question. Congressman, you've highlighted the importance of your family's heritage as something you hold quite dear. I think you gave an interview to the Irish Times where you said exactly that. For you, what of your family's Irish heritage have you taken with you, as a political leader?
All of it. So with the obvious start here of saying thank you for including me in this incredible panel. Taoiseach, it is an honor to be with you, sir. I'm sorry that it can't be across a shorter distance than Zoom. But to Ambassador Power, always lovely to be with you. Can't imagine somebody better to share an extended St. Patrick's Day with than a daughter of both countries. So thank you, and fellow redhead. And just very briefly to Chairman Neal, I know part of this discussion is obviously based off of my family's contribution and to the United States and the Irish heritage. Chairman Neal has done as much as any living person today to sustain that Irish-American connection. And as Ambassador Power highlighted, what he has consistently done, not just on that visit a year or so ago with the Speaker, but from his perch as the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee to the ranking member beforehand, but what he has done to continue to foster that connection with Ireland and across partisan lines here, which is extremely difficult to do in these times in the United States. But it's an art, and he deserves an awful lot of credit for it, which characteristically he has not sought. But he does deserve to get recognized for it. So I'm glad that he was able to join us briefly. Very briefly, sir, to your question. Look, I think, as I think everybody knows, my family is very proud of our Irish heritage. You saw my Aunt Vicky reference that in her welcome, and obviously a huge thanks to the UK Institute for putting this on. But I think more than any one piece of this, it is, to double back on the ambassador's point here, it's about the story. It's about the fact that a distant relative of mine left Ireland with nothing in the midst of a famine. And a couple generations later, his great-great-grandson was president of the United States. It was the fact that he ended up in East Boston, in an immigrant community, at a time when the anti-Irish rhetoric and sentiment was building and led to a crescendo. And all of us know the stories and the history of Nina, no Irish need apply, and all of the rest of the prejudice and challenges that came with it. And Patrick Kennedy had led a very difficult life and died young, as is chronicled in the book. But he was able to get a toehold, and his remarkable wife was able to shoulder enormous burden and built themselves up. And Robert, what I think is so amazing about that story is today, East Boston is still an immigrant community. Today, immigrants are still met with a similar type of rhetoric and a similar type of prejudice. And today, they are still fighting through that same challenge and chain and success. And so I think for my family, and I don't want to speak for all members of my family, there are a lot of us, and we have different opinions on a lot of things. But I think one thing we do hold fast to is that story and that connection with other immigrant stories and immigrant families, because that is our own. And so when you go to the border or when you meet with immigrant families, you hear about the challenges that they are enduring. I do think back to my family and what they had to endure. And if it wasn't 150 years ago when they came, how is that all that different to what somebody is confronting right now on our southern border?
Thank you, Congressman. I think we'll return to that in a moment. But before we do, Dr. Marr, I wanted to ask you about your chapter on Ted Kennedy, the distant Peacemaker. We've been talking a lot about stories and change, transitions that people have gone through. And you identify one in the chapter about Senator Kennedy's transition. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that and about specifically his relationship with John Hume and how that was important to Senator Kennedy's leadership role as a peacemaker and an honest broker in Northern Ireland.
Sure. Well, thank you. And good morning, everybody from Shanghai. And just to echo everyone else's sentiments that it's so wonderful to be here. Both to be on such an illustrious panel, but also to have the opportunity to talk about Ted Kennedy's role as a distant peacemaker. I think it's fair to say he went on quite a significant journey towards his role as distant peacemaker, but I would also emphasize he was never a distant warrior, and he was never supportive of paramilitarism, of hardline military approach to the conflict in Northern Ireland. Of course, he couldn't have been because of the fate that had befallen members of his own family. But in his early approach towards Northern Ireland, the early 1970s, some of his rhetoric could be seen as given maybe ideological support to more hardline Republicans in Northern Ireland, along with Senator Abe Ribicoff and then Congressman Hugh Carey. He instigated hearings on Northern Ireland on Capitol Hill in 1972. He also very famously compared Northern Ireland to Vietnam, saying that it was Britain's Vietnam and that Bloody Sunday was Britain's My Lai. That rhetoric very much changed when he met John Hume on the fringes of a conference in Germany in the early 1970s, a meeting that was instigated by the Irish Embassy there. And that meeting took place at the Irish Embassy. And from then on, Senator Kennedy himself would talk about that was when the great re-education of Senator Ted Kennedy took place under the tutelage of John Hume. In 1976, Kennedy organized for Hume to have a fellowship at the Center for International Studies at Harvard University. So that allowed John Hume to be present in Boston for a semester. And it was during this time that Senator Kennedy introduced him to people like Tip O'Neill, who ended up really enjoying a sort of a father-son type relationship with so Tip O'Neill and John Hume enjoyed a sort of a father-son type relationship. Also introduced him to Daniel Moynihan and to Hugh Carey in New York. And it would be within a year of that both on St. Patrick's Day 1977, that the Four Horsemen, which was the moniker they went under, introduced their first ever statement on Northern Ireland. I know this year we celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Friends of Ireland and the significance of that. But that 1977 statement on behalf of the four men, guided by John Hume, guided by the Irish government, that I would argue was such a crucial step towards US involvement in Ireland and Northern Ireland. It was the first time you had this group of Irish American politicians saying, first of all, we beseech the men of violence in Northern Ireland to cease, to put down their weapons, but crucially, we also beseech our fellow Americans to stop funding this violence. So that was a huge sort of journey that he'd gone on from early on, providing ideological support to the men of violence, to by 1977 saying, no, we do not stand with these men.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I mean, where do you see that relationship going now? I mean, Senator Kennedy established this foundation on human rights and the peacemaking concept. What is the next iteration of it in your estimation? Where does Senator Kennedy's legacy go from here?
So, I mean, once that statement was issued in 1977, that was that was where he stood from then onwards. It was all about peace. It was all about, as has already been mentioned, finding that role for America as an honest broker, and continually working on that. So the working towards the 1977 Carter Statement was very significant. Again, from March 77 to August 77, when the Carter Statement on Northern Ireland was issued, Kennedy was a driving force in recalibrating US foreign policy towards Northern Ireland. Obviously, up until that point, the US had very much said this is an internal matter for the United Kingdom. You know, we have a very strict policy of non-involvement here. But it was that Carter Statement of 1977 that broke that policy irrevocably. There was no going back on that. And that was the first time that America said, okay, we have an interest here. We have a concern for what's going on, and in the event that that an agreement can be found that is agreeable to all sides in Northern Ireland, we would look at ways in which we could help fund peace initiatives, fund job seeking, essentially money for peace. So that was really, really significant. You know, that was something that Ireland had been trying to get for years before that, all the way back to JFK's time, and it was something that could never happen. But it was the driving of Senator Kennedy and his fellow horsemen that brokered that. From then, obviously, progress wasn't linear, and the early 1980s were a difficult time. And it's no surprise that 1981, the year of the hunger strikes, was the year that they felt they had to, you know, formalize this grouping, and set up the Friends of Ireland. He continued to work, and right up to the 1990s, obviously, he was a crucial driving force in organising for a visa for Gerry Adams to travel to the United States. In fact, it was actually at Tip O'Neill's funeral that himself and John Hume spoke about that, and he would later engage with President Clinton to organise for that. So that sort of feels like Tip O'Neill's very last contribution to peace in Northern Ireland, and it was delivered through Senator Kennedy. So his role and his legacy was consistent, and there was so much going on behind the scenes there. And it was something that he took a little bit of flack for as well, and I mentioned that to an extent in the chapter. This was never a cynical vote-getting exercise for him or any of his fellow politicians. You know, it was all about a lasting legacy. It was all about standing up for what was right. It was the ultimate profiling courage.
Thank you. Ambassador Power, we just heard a little bit about Senator Kennedy's journey, and you spoke earlier about the US and the need to meet the world where it is. In what way can the United States and Ireland, do you think, collaborate to meet the world where it is now and the challenges that it faces?
Always have to remember the pesky mute button a year in. It's a great question. I mean, I maybe just in the interest of time, I'd focus on a couple dimensions. I mean, first, I think the fact that the United States and Ireland sit together on the UN Security Council, which I alluded to earlier, I'll dwell on that a little bit, because I think, you know, even many Irish people aren't necessarily that attuned to what Ireland has been doing abroad for a very long time. If I'm not mistaken, and I'll get corrected if I am, but I'm pretty sure I'm not, Ireland actually has the longest record of any country at the United Nations. There are 193 countries of having troops participating in UN peacekeeping operations. That's the longest unbroken record of any nation. And today it has 520 peacekeepers, which doesn't sound like a lot, but per capita is one of the highest in the world. And why does that relate to the United States? Well, there's a lot of fatigue here after enduring the forever wars which persist. There's a recognition, as there has been for a long time, that America can't be the world's policeman. And yet the US has a catalytic role in strengthening a collective good like UN peacekeeping. This is something we tried to do in the Obama-Biden administration, and I know President Biden is now intent on doing as well. It means bringing in more women police, more women soldiers, for example, because the issue of sexual violence is so horrific in so many conflict areas. It means paying attention to something that Ireland can speak to again with a unique voice, which is the link between climate and conflict. and what are the ramifications there for peacekeepers, for example. So I just think now you have a really engaged Biden-Harris administration, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, our new UN ambassador, sitting down with Ireland's ambassador, putting their heads together and thinking, okay, we've got the superpower and the resources of that, the military training, and now we've got a country that actually has experience in the field and prides itself on being a bridge builder. I would also celebrate, and this is, again, I think something that Irish people would be really proud of if they knew. There'd be some controversy, I know, so I know politicians never quite know how much to lean in on this, but Ireland is per capita and in terms of GDP really generous when it comes to development assistance. And the United Kingdom, unfortunately, is going to be cutting much of its assistance back, or at least some of it, at a time where the United States hopefully is going to lean in more than we have in the past. But when, for example, President Trump pulled out of the World Health Organization, Ireland announced it would quadruple its annual donation. Now, its donation was small relative to that of the US, but 4 times whatever you're contributing is going to make a difference. And the commitments that Ireland has made to increase its development assistance by 2030 to try to get up to the 0.7% of GDP, that's a wonderful thing for a small country to do. And it's the kind of thing that other countries look to, feel pressure because of, like, if Ireland can do it, well, then we need to get on that train as well. And I can't stress how important that other regarding mindset is, which all Irish people have had by necessity, of course, for so long, knowing in the genes that you might have to leave at some point. It's only recently that that's probably getting weaned out of the gene pool. But that ability to look and say, well, this is what Congressman Kennedy was talking about, there, but for the grace of God, go I. To know that that Irish people in the past have been subjected to famine and acute malnutrition, subjected to sectarian violence, subjected to war, subjected to brain drains where, if you had an education, you felt you had to leave. That puts Ireland in a great position to be looking out and thinking, okay, what programmatic investments can we make to support people who haven't gone through the journey that we have gone through yet?
Thank you, Ambassador. Congressman, I want to give you the last word on this panel. And essentially, I want to ask you exactly the same question that I asked the Ambassador, but maybe reflecting on, challenges here in the United States. You've already alluded a little bit to it, but what of the Irish experience can U.S. policymakers draw on, to improve the United States?
Thank you. You're kind to come back, and I want to thank everybody again for being generous with your time. 2 points I wanted to just build a little bit off of what the ambassador said. A country that is close to her heart, where she's done an awful lot of work, was Timor-Leste, East Timor, where I've done some work as well. And a country that actually had a notably large presence there of aid assistance, Ireland, right? Literally half a world away. And I think it was actually, an ambassador, you can correct me, I think it was a bus driver who was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for his Timor Tom, if I remember correctly, who was for his work trying to foster support and for the Timorese people. That you have these mighty superpowers that are struggling to help out a country that most diplomats couldn't pick up off of a map, and yet there was Ireland sending people and aid and supplies. And so I do think that, as the ambassador said, that sense of humanity, that sense of dignity, that is, I think it was Moynihan that said, to be Irish is to know that the world will break your heart, right? We've gone through some very tough times and seen some very tough things. And with that is a sense of connection that I think cuts across so many other different barriers of ideology, of sectarianism, of language, of ethnicity, because those tough times are not unique, unfortunately, to anyone. And I think that's very applicable here. Look, the lunch that Chairman Neal alluded to, I think is a fascinating moment, right? It is the only head of state where this type of honor is offered, is to the Taoiseach, where the Taoiseach is granted an Oval Office visit every year. No other head of state is granted such an honor. That there's a brunch every year in the Taoiseach's honor, put on by the Speaker of the House, Democrat or Republican. No other head of state has that honor. And to have both back to back, it's a busy social calendar, Taoiseach, but it's to see the participants in that brunch, the 150 or so individuals that show up, Democrat and Republican, across the entire spectrum politically, House and Senate, leaders across our society, just to strengthen those bonds. And gosh, if not now, then when? Just to find those times to strengthen those connections. So I think there's a lot that can be learned of. There's a lot of challenges that have been solved over a good story and a pint last time I checked, and now it's probably a good time to solve one more.
Thank you, Congressman. I want to thank the panelists today for their time. They've been extremely generous. Chairman Neal, Ambassador Power, Congressman Kennedy, and Dr. Marr. I also would like to thank the Taoiseach for joining us earlier, the Edward N. Kennedy Institute, of course, for hosting us, the editors of the book for sharing from Whence I Came with us, and of course, Dr. Alicia Moore from the Consulate General here in Boston in unifying all of us around this project. So I thank you very much, everybody. I'd like to invite people to stay on. We're going to leave with a recording from a pipe band in New Ross. I hope you enjoy it. I think you really will. Thank you again, everybody.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Quayside in New Ross, County Wexford. I'm standing by the emigrant flame, a symbol remembering and honouring all those who left this island. In 1848, Patrick Kennedy was one of those seeking a better life in the New World. 1963 would see the return of his great-grandson, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, as President of the United States.
I'm glad to be here. It took 115 years to make this trip.
It was on that wonderful day in '63 that the school children of New Ross and myself joined the President in singing our famous anthem, The Boys of Wexford. I would like to leave you with the New Ross and District Pipe Band playing that tune. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19 restrictions, they cannot appear live. So enjoy the music, the images of New Ross, the Kennedy Summer School, and I hope you have an opportunity to visit us in New Ross very soon.
From the grave of the 35th President of the United States, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the torch has been passed. And we light this flame to honour all of our emigrants, old and new. And it will burn as a symbol of the affection that we have for our diaspora, as a living sign that they are our family and we are their family, irrespective of where they are around the world.
The awful stench of that type of malaise in the community.
Well, in 2013, when the Trust and the Council in town were looking at celebrating the 50th anniversary of John F. Kennedy's iconic visit to New Ross in 1963, we came up with the idea of doing the summer school as a lead-in to that the previous September. Nowadays, people spend an awful lot of their time in a virtual existence or an online existence, or in consuming all different types of news in inanimate forms. Here they gather for a weekend, they socialise together, they are exposed to a diverse range of views, on even on issues in which there might be a lot of consensus in Ireland, like Trump. They get to hear all of that alternative opinion, they engage in it directly, and they find and make friends and build relationships with people. We gather probably the most impressive panels ever put together on American politics, all interested in some kind of current affairs.
Because a summer school has a certain importance, I believe, in terms of getting around the nuance of a debate, allowing free thinking and different perspectives to come on a debate, and avoiding the simplistic black and white type of contributions we have through social media.